Montgomery, Alabama. Would you fight for everything you built, even if the world told you to walk away? Benjamin Carter stood outside his own store, staring at the locked doors as if they were a betrayal. Carter and Sons Furniture wasn't just a business. It was his life's work. He had spent 50 years building it, pouring his sweat and soul into every handcrafted piece. And now he was locked out like a stranger. His longtime business rival, Richard Langston, had always wanted Carter's prime location in downtown Montgomery. He had offered to buy it many times, but Benjamin had refused. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy. Carter and Sons was proof that a black-owned business could thrive despite the odds. It was history. It was pride. It was family. But Langston wasn't a man who took no lightly. Using his connections, he had forged documents claiming Benjamin had sold the store to him. With a few corrupt officials on his payroll, Langston had everything he needed to make it look legitimate. And just like that, Benjamin Carter had lost everything. Or so Langston thought. Today, Benjamin wasn't walking away. He had fought too hard, worked too long, and sacrificed too much to let a thief steal his life's work. The courthouse was packed. Reporters filled the seats, community members whispered in anger, and young entrepreneurs who had looked up to Carter sat with fists clenched. Everyone knew what was at stake. If Benjamin Carter lost, it wouldn't just be his store. It would be a message that black businesses could be erased with a signature. His lawyer, a sharp young woman named Denise Hamilton, stood beside him. "Are you ready?" she asked. Benjamin took a deep breath, then nodded. "This ain't just for me. This is for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." As he stepped into the courtroom, one thing was clear. His legacy wasn't for sale. Benjamin Carter stood outside his own store, staring at the locked doors as if they were a betrayal. Carter and Sons Furniture wasn't just a business. It was his life's work. He had spent 50 years building it, pouring his sweat and soul into every handcrafted piece. And now he was locked out like a stranger. His longtime business rival, Richard Langston, had always wanted Carter's prime location in downtown Montgomery. He had offered to buy it many times, but Benjamin had refused. It wasn't about money. It was about legacy. Carter and Sons was proof that a black-owned business could thrive despite the odds. It was history. It was pride. It was family. But Langston wasn't a man who took no lightly. Using his connections, he had forged documents claiming Benjamin had sold the store to him. With a few corrupt officials on his payroll, Langston had everything he needed to make it look legitimate. And just like that, Benjamin Carter had lost everything. One morning, Carter arrived at his store and found the doors locked. "You don't own this place anymore," Langston's lawyer sneered, standing in front of the store like he had always belonged there. "That's a lie," Carter shouted, pulling out the original deed to the building. His hands shook, but not with fear, only fury. But somehow, Langston had a new deed, one signed with Carter's signature. "You signed it over to me," Langston smirked, waving the document in the air. "Or have you just forgotten? You are getting old." Carter's blood boiled. He had never signed anything. He had never given up his business. But Langston had the paperwork, and suddenly, Carter was the one being questioned. The police were called. Carter was thrown out of his own business. His community was outraged. His family begged him to fight. And so, Carter took Langston to court. The courthouse was packed. Reporters filled the seats. Community members whispered in anger, and young entrepreneurs who had looked up to Carter sat with fists clenched. Everyone knew what was at stake. If Benjamin Carter lost, it wouldn't just be his store. It would be a message that black businesses could be erased with a signature. His lawyer, a sharp young woman named Denise Hamilton, stood beside him. "Are you ready?" she asked. Benjamin took a deep breath, then nodded. "This ain't just for me. This is for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." As he stepped into the courtroom, one thing was clear. His legacy wasn't for sale. But what Langston didn't know. Carter had a secret weapon. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, lawyers, and townspeople who had come to witness the fight of Benjamin Carter's life. Richard Langston sat at the defense table, flanked by his team of expensive attorneys. His smirk never wavered, his confidence unshaken. To him, this was just another business move, one he had already won. But Benjamin Carter wasn't done yet. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at Carter. "Mr. Carter, do you have proof that the deed was forged?" Slowly, Carter rose to his feet. His back was straight, his voice unwavering. "I don't just have proof, Your Honor. I have the truth." A ripple of murmurs spread across the courtroom. Even Langston's smirk faltered for just a second. Carter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, holding it up for the entire room to see. Inside this envelope is the real evidence of what happened. The evidence that will prove I never signed my business away. The courtroom leaned in, anticipation thick in the air. Langston shifted in his seat, exchanging a glance with his lawyers. Carter stepped forward. "For 50 years, I built that store with my own 2 hands. I sacrificed. I struggled. And I will not stand here and let a thief take it from me." His lawyer, Denise Hamilton, nodded and turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, we request permission to present this evidence." The judge hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Proceed." As Carter handed the envelope to his attorney, the weight of the moment settled over the room. Everyone held their breath. Because in the next few minutes, the truth was about to be exposed. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. All eyes were on Benjamin Carter as he stood firm, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting to reveal the truth that no one expected. "Your Honor," Carter's lawyer, Denise Hamilton, said, stepping forward, "we have a handwriting analysis report." She handed a thick folder to the judge. "This report proves, without a doubt, that the signature on Langston's deed is forged." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Reporters whispered hurriedly into their microphones. Members of the community leaned forward in their seats. Langston's face darkened. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "This is nothing but a desperate attempt to discredit me." The judge held up a hand for silence and carefully examined the report. His expression grew heavier with each passing second. But Denise wasn't done. "And we have something else." She nodded toward the bailiff, who walked toward the center of the courtroom, pressing play on a large screen. A grainy video appeared. The setting was unmistakable: Langston's office. The room fell silent as the footage played. The video showed Langston's assistant handing over a document to another man, who flipped through the pages and nodded. The timestamp in the corner of the screen revealed the truth. The deed had been created and exchanged, days before Carter had supposedly signed it. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Langston's expensive legal team shifted uncomfortably. Denise turned back to the judge, her voice steady. This video is irrefutable proof that the document was forged before Mr. Carter was even made aware of the supposed sale. Langston's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists on the table. The judge adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Mr. Langston," he said, his voice sharp, "care to explain?" Silence. Langston swallowed hard, but there was nowhere to run. The truth had been laid bare for the entire world to see. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but one thing was clear. Benjamin Carter had just turned the case upside down. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters typed frantically, whispers filled the air, and Langston's lawyers scrambled to find an argument strong enough to save their client. "This doesn't prove," one of Langston's attorneys started, his voice strained. "It proves everything," the judge interrupted, his tone firm. He placed the folder down, then turned his full attention to Langston. "This court does not tolerate fraud." Carter's lawyer, Denise Hamilton, rose confidently. "Your Honor, we request the immediate return of Mr. Carter's business and all assets wrongfully taken from him." The judge nodded without hesitation. "Request granted. Carter and Sons Furniture is to be restored to its rightful owner immediately. And I strongly recommend that charges be filed against Mr. Langston for fraud and forgery." Langston's face turned red with rage. "This is my town," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. The bailiffs approached, their hands hovering near their holsters. One of them smirked. "Not anymore." The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Richard Langston, once untouchable, was placed in handcuffs. Carter exhaled deeply, his shoulders finally relaxing. His legacy, his life's work, it was his again. The reporters erupted, shouting questions as Langston was led out of the courtroom. But the only voice that mattered now was the judge's. "Mr. Carter, justice has been served." A slow clap started from the back of the room, then another, then another. The entire courtroom rose to their feet, applauding a man who had just done the impossible. Benjamin Carter had beaten the system. The jury had been gone for only 30 minutes. But to Benjamin Carter, it felt like a lifetime. He sat motionless, his hands clasped together, waiting for the words that would decide everything. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors returned to their seats. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman in the front row of the jury stood holding a folded piece of paper. "We have, Your Honor." The paper was handed to the judge, who unfolded it and read its contents carefully. The air was thick with tension. Finally, the judge looked up. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant, Richard Langston, guilty." Cheers erupted from the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, camera flashes lighting up the room. Members of the community clapped and shouted in triumph. Langston's face twisted in rage, but there was nothing he could do. The bailiffs moved toward him, prepared to take him back into custody. Carter's hands trembled as he turned to his lawyer, Denise Hamilton. She smiled and squeezed his arm. "We won." Carter exhaled deeply, his eyes scanning the room filled with people who had supported him from day one. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "We all won." The judge banged his gavel, bringing the courtroom back to order. "Mr. Carter, your business is officially restored to you. Carter and Sons Furniture remains in the rightful hands of its owner." Tears stung Carter's eyes, but he held them back. He had fought for this moment, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't win against power and corruption. But just as he began to take it all in, something happened that no one saw coming. The battle had been won. But the real victory, that was still to come. Langston's empire crumbled overnight. Without his influence, His business ventures fell apart. His investors pulled out, and the town he once controlled turned its back on him. No one wanted to be associated with a fraud. His name, once synonymous with power, had become a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, the town came together in celebration. A community event was organized, not just to recognize Carter's victory, but to honor his decades of hard work. Friends, neighbors, and supporters gathered outside Carter and Sons Furniture, clapping as Benjamin Carter stood before them. A reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Mr. Carter, what's next for you?" Carter smiled, the weight of the last few months finally lifting. "I'm going to rebuild, stronger than before. And this time, I'll make sure no one like Langston ever tries this again." The crowd erupted in cheers. As the applause settled, Carter felt a small hand slip into his own. He looked down to see his grandson staring up at him with bright, eager eyes. "One day, I want to run the store," the boy whispered. Carter's heart swelled with pride. He knelt, placing a firm hand on his grandson's shoulder. "And you will." As the sun set over Montgomery, Carter stood tall, surrounded by his family and community. His fight had been more than just about a business. It had been about a legacy. And now, that legacy was secure. He had won his battle that day. But in the end, he had done something even greater. He had secured his family's future.